Why Guardian Media is disingenuous on the PM's U.S.-Venezuela stance and fails to understand strategic leadership in crisis, an editorial by Professor Wall Street. In a region where drug cartels operate with impunity, authoritarian regimes threaten neighbors, and small island states face existential security challenges, Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar has demonstrated the kind of decisive leadership that history demands. Yet Guardian Media's response reveals a troubling disconnect between editorial idealism and the harsh realities of Caribbean geopolitics. The Prime Minister's unequivocal support for U.S. anti-drug operations and her commitment to regional security is not reckless rhetoric. It is principled governance in the face of unprecedented threats. While Guardian Media wrings its hands over diplomatic niceties, our Prime Minister confronts the brutal truth. Trinidad and Tobago cannot afford the luxury of moral ambiguity when our sovereignty, security, and citizens' lives hang in the balance. Here are the Fourth Estate Guardian's Media 10 fatal flaws. 1. National security is non-negotiable. When Guardian Media questions the Prime Minister's alignment with the United States, they fundamentally misunderstand the security calculus facing small Caribbean states. Venezuela's regime, already accused by the U.S. Treasury of operating as a narco-state through the Cartel de los Soles, poses a direct threat to regional stability. If aggression were to escalate against Trinidad and Tobago or our CARICOM partners, it is the United States, not Venezuela's crumbling military, that possesses both the capability and demonstrated willingness to defend democratic sovereignty in the Americas. No responsible leader gambles with national survival for editorial approval. The Prime Minister's position reflects strategic realism, not diplomatic naivety. 2. Economic pragmatism over editorial purism. Guardian Media's criticism conveniently ignores Trinidad and Tobago's economic reality. The United States remains our largest trading partner, our most significant source of foreign investment, and our primary security guarantor. To suggest that honoring these vital relationships undermines our independence reveals a profound misunderstanding of how small states navigate great power competition. Our prosperity depends on strategic partnerships, not on striking poses that satisfy academic theorists, but leave our economy vulnerable and our people unprotected. 3. Willful blindness to Venezuelan state collapse. While Guardian Media downplays Venezuela's descent into narco-authoritarianism, the evidence of state-sponsored criminality grows daily. The regime that once commanded respect across Latin America now oversees mass emigration, economic collapse, and, according to U.S. intelligence, industrial-scale drug trafficking operations. To treat such a regime as a legitimate interlocutor rather than a regional threat represents journalistic malpractice disguised as diplomatic balance. 4. The drug war's moral imperative. Every interdicted shipment of cocaine represents hundreds of young Caribbean lives saved from addiction and criminal violence. When Guardian Media laments the deaths of traffickers while ignoring their victims, they reveal a moral compass that points away from the communities most affected by drug-related violence. The Prime Minister's stark language reflects the brutal reality our law enforcement officers face daily. Drug cartels show no mercy to their victims, and effective deterrence requires matching their resolve with our own. 5. Leadership requires moral clarity, not diplomatic euphemisms. Guardian Media criticizes the Prime Minister's forthright language, preferring the sanitized vocabulary of diplomatic cables to the clear moral distinctions that effective leadership demands. But in confronting transnational crime and authoritarianism, Euphemisms serve only to obscure the stakes and confuse the public. When the Prime Minister states her responsibility to protect Trinidad and Tobago, even if that requires difficult words and firm positions, she articulates the primary obligation of democratic leadership, defending the people who elected her, not placating editorial boards who will never face the consequences of weak governance. 6. Substance over style. The media's misplaced priorities. By focusing on rhetorical style rather than strategic substance, Guardian Media demonstrates the superficiality that plagues contemporary journalism. Strong language pales beside the strong actions required to secure our borders, protect our citizens, and maintain our democratic institutions against authoritarian pressure. The Prime Minister's critics offer no alternative framework for addressing these challenges, only complaints about her refusal to speak in the measured tones they prefer. 7. Historical precedent demands choosing sides. Small states face a recurring historical choice: align with democratic powers or accommodate authoritarian ones. Those who chose neutrality during the Cold War often found themselves isolated and vulnerable when regional conflicts erupted. The Prime Minister's decision reflects historical wisdom. In great power competition, strategic clarity serves small states better than moral ambiguity. 8. Democratic accountability, not editorial approval. Guardian Media's attempt to undermine public confidence in the Prime Minister's judgment reflects a fundamental confusion about democratic governance. She was elected to represent Trinidad and Tobago's interests, not to satisfy editorial preferences or academic theories about international relations. Her decisive response to regional threats demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership that democratic accountability requires: clear priorities, strategic thinking, and the courage to act in the national interest regardless of elite opinion. 9. Governing realities versus academic abstractions. While university professors theorize about destabilizing language and violations of international law, prime ministers must choose between imperfect options under conditions of uncertainty and pressure. Guardian Media's preference for academic voices over practical governance reveals an elite bias that privileges theoretical purity over effective leadership. The Prime Minister operates in the real world, where neutrality can mean vulnerability and where strong partnerships provide the security that abstract principles cannot deliver. 10. The mandate for decisive action. Guardian Media forgets that Prime Minister Prasad Bisesa received a democratic mandate to govern, which necessarily includes the authority to make difficult decisions about national security and international relations. Her loyalty belongs to the citizens who elected her, not to newspaper editorial boards or academic symposiums. As she has correctly stated, my loyalty is to Trinidad and Tobago, not to academic opinions or editorial preferences. This represents democratic governance at its most authentic. The stakes demand serious leadership. The Guardian's critique ultimately reveals more about contemporary media priorities than about governmental decision-making. In an era when drug cartels destabilize entire regions, when authoritarian regimes threaten democratic neighbors, and when great power competition reshapes global politics, Trinidad and Tobago requires leadership willing to make hard choices based on national interests rather than editorial fashion. Prime Minister Prasad Bisesa's approach may discomfort those who prefer diplomatic ambiguity to strategic clarity, but it reflects the kind of principled realism that small states need to navigate an increasingly dangerous world. Her willingness to stand with democratic allies against authoritarian threats, to support effective anti-drug operations, even when they involve violence, and to speak plainly about these challenges demonstrates the courage that leadership demands. In conclusion, resolute leadership in dangerous times. Guardian Media's position exposes a troubling inconsistency. They criticize decisive leadership while offering no realistic alternative for protecting Trinidad and Tobago's interests. Their preference for diplomatic niceties over strategic necessities reflects the kind of thinking that leaves small states vulnerable when great power conflicts intensify. History will judge Prime Minister Persad Bisesa's stance not by the standards of editorial boards, but by its effectiveness in protecting Trinidad and Tobago's sovereignty, security, and prosperity. In choosing strategic partnership with the United States over accommodation with Venezuelan authoritarianism, she has placed our nation's vital interests first. The Guardian may portray her words as reckless, but citizens who understand the stakes will recognize them as resolute. In times of regional crisis, what our democracy needs is not timid hesitation disguised as diplomatic wisdom, but bold leadership willing to defend our values and interests against those who would destroy them. On this measure, Prime Minister Persad Bisesa has not merely met expectations, she has exceeded them. While her critics offer only complaints, she provides the kind of strategic leadership that will ensure Trinidad and Tobago emerges stronger from these current challenges, secure in its partnerships, and confident in its future.